Hi, I'm Glenn Pearson. Welcome to today's flash interview sponsored by ACOEH Exhibit Hall. Today I'm going to be introducing you to the CMIO of InfoMC, Harm Scherpbier. Before I do that, I just want to mention quickly that part of the reason I'm on this call is that I know a little bit about the healthcare world. I had a book come out about a year ago called Thriving in the Healthcare Market, Strategies from an Industry Insider for Selling Your Product. So I'll say a word about it at the end, but we're really here to find out more about InfoMC. And what they do is they optimize outcomes by using technology specifically for care coordination and care management. So they have a strong suite of products that they offer to people. So welcome, Harm. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Glenn.
Couple of questions for you. Over the next 5 years, where do you think value-based care and alternative payment models are going, and what will the impact be on providers as they adapt to that?
Yeah, I think the best prediction is that accountable care will continue to grow, both in terms of how many providers take on risk, also in terms of how many patients are enrolled in accountable care plans, and also finally in terms of revenue, at-risk dollars. Remember, the COVID pandemic, it hurt particularly those practices in traditional fee-for-service arrangements, and they saw their businesses go on hold for a prolonged time. And practices who had any form of capitation or alternative reimbursement generally did well during the hard months of the pandemic. So, and also the expectation for the new administration in Washington is that the support is for ongoing growth in alternative payment models and accountable care. So because of that, I see several action items for providers. First, I think if they're currently in a one-sided upside-only arrangement, I think they might consider moving to the next level, two-sided risk, and by doing that, increase the incentives for the team. Secondly, once the practice takes on more risk, they will need to change how to take care of the population, in particular for those patients who are most at risk with high healthcare and social needs. You build a care team. That means care coordinators, nurses, behavioral health, social services specialists, primary care physicians, and also specialty care for common chronic conditions. The third thing I think is to focus really intensely on keeping patients out of the hospital and out of acute care. They need to be open and available and accessible, which is hard, but super important to be successful here. They need to be proactive. Don't wait for patients to call them, but engage with those patients who need it the most. And that requires a redesign of the way the practice works, specifically focused on team-based care. That rewires how clinicians work together, and it also really changes the way the patient experiences the care, and works in keeping patients out of the hospital for what we call ambulatory sensitive conditions. And finally, I'd say, keep an eye on the data. Use analytics and reports and work lists. We can talk about that more later.
Okay, well, that's a big agenda you mentioned there. So,
it is.
I'm assuming you need a lot of IT infrastructure to support that. So what do you think an organization needs in order to be able to do everything you just mentioned?
Yeah. That of course depends much on the type of practice and the type of health system, and whether they're large or small, or whether they're hospital centric or based around a physician practice. So there may not really be a general answer for all situations, but a couple of thoughts there. Practices will of course rely on their EHRs to capture the essential patient data and to identify the patients who are in need of most preventive care. That's a cornerstone. But as you start moving to real team-based care, and especially if there's multiple practices in an ACO with different EHRs, it can be good to implement a care coordination solution built specifically for that purpose. I work with InfoMC, whose platform is built for care management and care coordination. It really supports care teams, like I mentioned earlier, with nurses, behavioral health, social services, and then ACOs can load their own work lists into the system and configure the assessments. And they can build the workflows and even add their own content. So EHRs themselves don't often do very well with coordinating teamwork. And adding to that, I see growing opportunities for interoperability with the wider adoption of FHIR, and also with the pressure coming from the 21st Century Cures Act, which is now going into effect, makes it just much more feasible to implement a care coordination system that really interacts and interoperates with one or multiple EHRs.
Ooh, again, that's a huge amount to deal with. So let me back up to something you said a moment ago. You mentioned data analytics. What do you have a strategy that you recommend, or what kind of strategies are good for that?
Yeah, well, clearly data are key to managing a successful ACO, right? You need to know who your patients are. And that in itself, that sounds so simple, but it changes all the time. It's dynamic. And what that population needs in terms of healthcare, who are the heavy utilizers and what are the drivers? When does a patient need chronic care management? And when do I need behavioral health? And when do I need social terms of health? And to be fair, usually all three at the same time, right? These things go together. So you need data to help guide that. And it's not something that one person does on their own. This again comes down to teamwork, like data-guided teamwork. Analytics and using long-term trends, short-term trends, that is the key component of being successful in value-based care.
Wow. Well, you've given us a lot to think about and digest, so thank you for spending your time with us. Let me send the listeners to your website on the ACO Exhibit Hall website. There is a InfoMC section of that, and check that out if you're interested in that. And then let me just mention my book again. If you have anything to do with interacting with the healthcare system, my book is called Thriving in the Healthcare Market, and it deals with 84 problems I've seen vendors have as they interact with hospitals and health organizations, and provides about 200 suggestions for how to minimize those problems. So come back to ACO Exhibit Hall anytime, check out more about what they have to offer. A lot of good companies there, and thank you for tuning in.